History is usually presented to us as a neat, linear progression of wars, treaties, and great men making rational decisions. We are taught that civilization is a sturdy structure built by logical actors. But that is a lie. If you scratch the surface of the historical record, you find that the timeline is actually held together by the deranged, the impossible, and the inexplicable. There exists a shadow history, a collection of individuals whose lives were so radically bizarre that they challenge our understanding of biology, psychology, and reality itself. These are not just eccentrics. They are glitches in the human code. We are going to look at the people who treated reality like a suggestion, the men who ate mountains, the women who birthed nightmares, and the aristocrats who turned their lives into performance art. This is the history they leave out of the textbooks, because it is too messy, too visceral, and too terrifying to fit into a syllabus. Number 1. Tarrare. France in the late 18th century was a place of revolution and chaos, but the most disturbing thing in the country wasn't the guillotine. It was a young man named Tarrare. Born near Lyon around 1772, Tarrare was a medical impossibility. He was a bottomless pit wrapped in human skin. By the time he was a teenager, he could eat a quarter of a bullock in a single day, yet he never gained weight. He remained gaunt, with skin that hung so loosely around his waist that he could wrap it around his body like a belt. When he hadn't eaten, his belly was deflated and sagging, but after a meal, it ballooned out like a distended balloon. He had a mouth that stretched impossibly wide, revealing teeth stained by whatever he had just consumed, and his body ran at a feverish temperature. He sweated constantly, and he smelled worse than a sewer. The odor that radiated from him was so offensive that people could not stand to be within 20 paces of him. It was the smell of a body that was constantly digesting itself. His parents, unable to feed a child who ate more than a herd of livestock, kicked him out. He traveled to Paris and became a street performer, swallowing corks, stones, and live animals for crowds. But when he joined the French Revolutionary Army, his condition became a logistical nightmare. Rations for 4 men didn't satisfy him. He was found scavenging in gutters, fighting stray dogs for rotting scraps, and eating garbage. Military surgeons took him in, not to cure him, but to study him. They gave him a live cat. Tarrare seized the animal, tore open its abdomen with his teeth, drank its blood, and ate the entire creature, leaving only the bones. He did the same with puppies, lizards, and snakes. He once swallowed a live eel whole without chewing. The horror of Tarrare peaked when he was suspected of something far worse than eating cats. A 14-month-old toddler disappeared from the hospital ward where Tarrare was staying. No trace of the child was ever found. The implication was too horrific to ignore, and he was chased from the hospital. When he finally died of tuberculosis years later, surgeons performed an autopsy. They found his esophagus was abnormally wide, allowing them to see all the way down into his stomach without instruments. His liver and gallbladder were massive, and his body was filled with pus. He wasn't just a glutton. He was a biological engine that burned hot and fast, consuming everything in its path until it finally consumed itself. Number 2, Charles Domery. While Tarrare was a creature of filth, his contemporary Charles Domery was a machine of efficiency. A Polish soldier serving in the Prussian and later French armies, Domery possessed a similar insatiable hunger, but without the stench or the madness. He was a soldier with an iron stomach. During a naval battle on the ship Hoche, a sailor's leg was blown off by cannon fire. While other men were screaming or reloading, Domery grabbed the severed leg and began to eat it. The crew had to wrestle the limb away from him and throw it into the sea to stop him. After being captured by the British, he became a subject of fascination for the sick and hurt commissioners. They decided to test the limits of his appetite. In a single day, they fed him 16 pounds of raw cow udder, raw beef, and tallow candles, washed down with 5 bottles of porter beer. He ate it all, He didn't vomit. He didn't get sick. He just went to sleep and woke up hungry. Domri preferred his meat raw. He would eat rats, cats, and even 4 to 5 pounds of grass a day if no meat was available. In 1 year alone, he reportedly consumed 174 cats. Unlike Tarrare, Domri was physically fit and seemingly healthy. He was simply a man whose metabolic dial was turned up to a level that science still cannot explain. Number 3, Mad Jack Mitten. If Tarrare and Domri were victims of biology, John Mitten was a victim of boredom. Known as Mad Jack, he was a Regency-era aristocrat who inherited a fortune and spent every penny trying to kill himself in the most entertaining ways possible. He was the definition of more money than sense. He lived at Halston Hall in Shropshire, where he kept a personal zoo that included 2,000 dogs and a bear. He didn't just keep the bear in a cage. He treated it like a pet. During a dinner party, he decided it would be amusing to ride the bear into his drawing room in full hunting gear. The bear, realizing it was a bear and not a horse, bit him on the leg. Mitten thought this was hilarious. His driving was equally suicidal. He once asked a passenger in his carriage if he had ever been in a crash. When the man said no, Mitten shouted that he had been a slow fellow all his life and immediately drove the carriage into a bank at full speed, flipping it over just to see what would happen. He was known to hunt ducks in the middle of winter. He drank 6 bottles of port a day. But his most famous act of madness was his cure for the hiccups. While getting ready for bed, he was annoyed by a bout of hiccups. He decided the best way to shock his system was to set his own shirt on fire. He lit the fabric, and within seconds he was engulfed in flames. He survived, badly burned, but he never learned his lesson. He died in a debtor's prison at the age of 37, a man who had lived life at full volume until the fuse burned out. Number 4, Timothy Dexter. In America, we have the story of Timothy Dexter, a man who proves that you don't have to be smart to be successful if you are infinitely lucky. Born in 1747, Dexter was an uneducated leather tanner who stumbled into wealth. His jealous neighbors, wanting to see him fail, gave him terrible business advice. They told him to ship warming pans, which are used to heat beds in cold climates, to the tropical West Indies. It was a joke, but Dexter did it. When the pans arrived, the local molasses industry realized the pans made excellent ladles for their boiling vats and bought them all at a massive markup. His rivals tried again. They told him to ship coal to Newcastle. This is an idiom for a useless act, like selling ice to Eskimos, because Newcastle was a major coal-producing city in England. Dexter didn't know the idiom. He shipped the coal. By sheer chance, his ships arrived during a massive miners' strike in Newcastle. The city was desperate for fuel, and he sold his cargo for a fortune. He bought up whalebone when nobody wanted it, only for it to become a fashion staple for corsets shortly after. He even wrote a book called A Pickle for the Knowing Ones, which was a rambling, incoherent mess with no punctuation. When people complained, he printed a second edition with a page full of periods and commas at the back, telling the readers to pepper and salt the text as they pleased. He was the ultimate example of failing upwards. Number 5, Emperor Norton I. San Francisco in the mid-19th century was a city of reinvention, but no one reinvented themselves quite like Joshua Abraham Norton. After losing his fortune in a rice market crash, he disappeared for a while and returned not as a failed businessman, but as Norton I, Emperor of the United States. He issued a proclamation to the local newspapers declaring his sovereignty. Instead of laughing him out of town, San Francisco played along. He wore a blue uniform with gold epaulets and marched through the streets inspecting public works. Police officers saluted him. Restaurants gave him free meals. Norton was delusional, but he was a benevolent despot. He issued decrees abolishing Congress for corruption and ordered the army to clear the politicians out. He demanded that African Americans be allowed to ride public streetcars, and attend public schools. He saw the anti-Chinese riots gripping the city and reportedly stood between the rioters and their victims, reciting the Lord's Prayer until the mob dispersed. He even ordered the construction of a suspension bridge between San Francisco and Oakland. Everyone thought it was impossible, but decades later, the Bay Bridge was built exactly where he said it should be. He printed his own currency, which local shops accepted as a form of charity that maintained his dignity. When he died, 30,000 people attended his funeral. He was a madman. Yes, but he was a madman who made the world slightly kinder. Number 6. Hung Shuquan. On the other side of the Pacific, a delusion had much bloodier consequences. Hung Shuquan was a failed scholar in Qing Dynasty China. After failing the civil service exams multiple times, he suffered a nervous breakdown. He fell into a fever dream where he ascended to heaven and met a golden-bearded father figure and an elder brother who gave him a sword to slay demons. Years later, he read a Christian pamphlet and the pieces clicked into place. The father was God. The elder brother was Jesus Christ, which meant he, Hung Shuquan, was the younger brother of Jesus. He founded the God-worshipping society and launched the Taiping Rebellion. He established the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom, ruling over millions of people. He banned opium, alcohol, and gambling, and strictly separated men and women. But while his followers lived in ascetic barracks, Hong retreated into his palace with a harem of 88 concubines. He spent his time editing the Bible to make it fit his narrative and issuing decrees that claimed God was speaking through him. The war he started to cleanse China of demons resulted in the death of 20 to 30 million people. It was one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. All started because one man failed a test and had a fever dream. Number 7. Tycho Brahe. If we go back to the 16th century, we find an astronomer whose life was as colorful as the stars he studied. Tycho Brahe was a Danish nobleman who ran the most advanced observatory in Europe, but he ran it like a frat house. He lost his nose in a duel over a mathematical formula when he was a student. For the rest of his life, he wore a prosthetic nose made of metal. Some said it was gold and silver, but modern analysis suggests it was brass. He carried glue in his pocket to reattach it if it wobbled. Tycho kept a dwarf jester named Yep, who sat under the dinner table and whom Tycho believed was psychic. But the centerpiece of his household was his pet moose. This moose was allowed to roam the castle and was apparently given beer to drink. One night, the moose was sent to a dinner party at a neighboring nobleman's house to entertain the guests. The moose drank too much beer, tried to climb a set of stairs, fell down, and died from the injury. Tycho himself died, just as absurdly. He was at a banquet in Prague, and adhering to strict etiquette, refused to leave the table to use the bathroom. He held his bladder for hours until it caused severe damage, likely a burst bladder or uremia, and he died in agony days later. His last words were reportedly, "Let me not seem to have lived in vain." He didn't, but he certainly died in pain. Number 8. Julie d'Aubigny. In 17th century France, there was a woman who treated gender roles and the law with equal disdain. Julie d'Aubigny, also known as La Maupin, was a sword-fighting opera singer who lived life like an action hero. Her father trained the court pages, so she learned to fence at a young age. She realized she preferred the sword to the sewing needle. When she was a teenager, she ran away with her fencing master and performed duels in taverns. She sang, she fought, and she wore men's clothes. Her life became truly cinematic when she fell in love with a young woman whose parents, trying to keep her away from Julie, sent the girl to a convent. Julie didn't give up. She joined the convent as a novice nun. When an elderly nun died, Julie stole the body, placed it in her lover's bed, and set the room on fire to fake the girl's death. They escaped together while the convent burned. Later, at a royal ball, she kissed a young woman on the dance floor. 3 noblemen challenged her to a duel for the insult. She took them all outside, fought them one by one, defeated them all, and then returned to the ball. She was eventually pardoned by the king, who found her exploits too amusing to punish. Number 9. The Chevalier d'Eon, the gender-bending spy of the 18th century. The Chevalier d'Eon lived a life of double identity that would confuse even the best intelligence agencies. Born in France, d'Eon was a diplomat, a soldier, and a spy for King Louis XV's secret network, the Secret du Roi. His most famous mission was to Russia. The French needed to get close to Empress Elizabeth, but relations were icy. d'Eon reportedly infiltrated the Russian court, disguised as a woman named Leah de Beaumont. He became a maid of honor to the Empress, gaining access to her inner circle and securing vital intelligence. Later, d'Eon lived in London as a man, but rumors about his true sex began to circulate. Betting pools were opened in the London Stock Exchange on whether d'Eon was male or female. d'Eon used this ambiguity to his advantage. Eventually, he declared he was actually a woman who had been raised as a boy to inherit property. The French King Louis XVI accepted this and ordered d'Eon to dress permanently in women's clothing. For the last decades of his life, d'Eon lived as a woman, even engaging in fencing tournaments in a full dress and corset. It was only after his death that an autopsy revealed he was biologically male, proving he had played the longest con in espionage history. Number 10. The Count of Saint-Germain. While d'Eon played with gender, the Count of Saint-Germain played with time. Appearing in the courts of Europe in the mid-1700s, the Count was a man of indeterminate age and infinite wealth. He spoke a dozen languages fluently, played the violin like a virtuoso, and painted with a technique no one could replicate. But his most striking claim was that he was immortal. He would casually mention conversations he had with Cleopatra or the Queen of Sheba. He would talk about events from hundreds of years ago as if he had been there. He never ate in public. He would sit at dinner parties, sipping wine and regaling guests with stories, but no food ever touched his lips. He claimed to have an elixir of life. The old women of the court would look at him and swear he looked exactly the same as he had 50 years prior when they were children. Was he a charlatan? Almost certainly. But he was a charlatan so skilled that even the great thinkers like Voltaire called him the man who knows everything and never dies. He vanished from history as mysteriously as he arrived, leaving behind a legacy of conspiracy theories that continues to this day. Number 11. Karl Tanzler. In Key West, Florida, in the 1930s, love crossed the line into madness. Karl Tanzler, a radiology technician, became obsessed with a young tuberculosis patient named Elena Hoyos. He believed she was his destined bride, revealed to him in visions by his ancestors. Despite his efforts to cure her, she died in 1931. Tanzler paid for her funeral and built her an above-ground mausoleum, to which he had the only key. He visited her every night. But visiting wasn't enough. 2 years later, he stole her body and took it home in a toy wagon. The body was decomposing, so Tanzler began a gruesome restoration project. He wired her bones together. He replaced her rotting skin with silk cloth soaked in wax and plaster. He put glass eyes in her sockets. He made a wig out of her own hair that her mother had given him. He dressed her in bridal clothes and slept next to her for 7 years. He lived in domestic bliss with a corpse, playing music for her and imagining she answered him. When he was finally caught, the statute of limitations for grave robbing had expired, so he was released. He spent the rest of his life living with a life-sized effigy of Elena, unable to let go of the woman he had turned into a doll. Number 12. The Marquis de Sade. The man whose name gave us the word sadism needs little introduction, but the story of his writing process is a testament to the power of obsession. Donatien Alphonse Francois, the Marquis de Sade, spent much of his life in prison for his libertine excesses. While locked in the Bastille in 1785, he wrote his most infamous work, The 120 Days of Sodom. This wasn't just a novel. It was a mathematical catalogue of perversion. It detailed the lives of 4 libertines who locked themselves in a castle and subject their victims to a structured escalation of torture and abuse. Terrified that his jailers would confiscate his work, Sade wrote the entire novel on a single roll of paper. He glued small scraps together to create a scroll that was 12 meters long and written in a microscopic hand. He would roll it up and hide it in the crevices in his cell wall. When the Bastille was stormed in 1789, Sade had been moved, and he believed his scroll was lost to the looters. He wept tears of blood over the loss of his masterpiece. It was actually saved and hidden for generations, a cursed object that catalogued the darkest corners of the human imagination. Number 13. Robert Liston. Before anesthesia, surgery was a race against pain. The faster you cut, the less the patient screamed. Robert Liston was the Usain Bolt of Victorian surgery. He could amputate a leg in 2.5 minutes. He was a big man who operated in a green coat and Wellington boots, shouting, "Time me, gentlemen," to the students in the gallery. But his speed sometimes came at a cost. His most famous operation is the only one in history with a 300% mortality rate. Liston was amputating a leg with such ferocious speed that he accidentally cut off the fingers of his assistant, who was holding the limb. In the same motion, he slashed the coattails of a distinguished spectator who was watching too closely. The spectator, thinking he had been stabbed, died of a heart attack on the spot. The patient later died of gangrene. The assistant died of infection. 1 surgery, 3 bodies. Liston was a brilliant surgeon who pioneered new techniques, but he is remembered as the man who wielded a knife like a broadsword. Number 14. Mary Toft. In 1726, England was captivated by a peasant woman named Mary Toft, who claimed to be giving birth to rabbits. This wasn't a metaphor. She was actually delivering dead rabbits. The local surgeon was baffled. He wrote to the king's surgeon, claiming he had delivered the trunk of a rabbit stripped of its skin from her body. The medical elite of London descended on her. They watched her, examined her, and somehow many of them believed it. They proposed theories about maternal impression, suggesting that because she had chased a rabbit while pregnant, her child had transformed. The hoax fell apart when a porter was caught sneaking a rabbit into her room. It turned out Mary and her accomplices had been manually inserting animal parts into her body to then birth them for the doctors. It was a grotesque, painful, and humiliating fraud that exposed the arrogance and gullibility of the scientific establishment. Mary confessed, was imprisoned for a short time, and then faded into obscurity, leaving behind a medical scandal that ruined reputations. Number 15. Madame Lalaurie. In the French quarter of New Orleans stands a mansion that is considered the most haunted house in the city. In the 1830s, it belonged to Delphine Lalaurie, a socialite known for her charm and her lavish parties. But there were whispers. Her slaves seemed terrified. They were emaciated. One neighbor saw a young girl fall to her death from the roof while trying to escape Lalaurie's whip. The truth exploded in 1834. A fire broke out in the kitchen. When rescuers arrived, they found the cook chained to the stove. She admitted she had started the fire as a suicide attempt because she was terrified of being taken to the attic. When the mob broke down the door to the attic, they found a torture chamber. Slaves were found bound in uncomfortable positions, their bodies mutilated, their limbs broken and reset in bizarre angles. Some wore spiked collars that prevented them from moving their heads. It was a house of horrors hidden behind a facade of southern gentility. Lalaurie escaped the mob, fleeing to France, and never faced justice for her crimes. Number 16. Baron Ramon von Ungern-Sternberg. During the Russian Civil War, the chaos allowed for the rise of warlords. but none were as terrifying as the Bloody Baron. Roman von Ungern-Sternberg was an anti-Bolshevik general who believed he was the reincarnation of the god of war. He took his troops into Mongolia, chasing a dream of restoring the Mongol Empire. He was a mystic, a Buddhist convert, and a sadist. He ruled through terror. He believed that death was a purifying force. His men would torture prisoners, leaving them on the frozen steppe to be eaten by wolves. There are stories of him skinning men alive or using rat torture, though some of this may be the exaggeration of his enemies. What is true is that he was a man who mixed ancient mysticism with modern warfare, creating a regime that felt like a dark fantasy novel brought to life. He was eventually captured by the Soviets and executed, but his legend as the Mad Baron lives on. Number 17. Gilles de Rais. History has few falls from grace as steep as Gilles de Rais. In the 15th century, he was a hero of France, a companion of Joan of Arc, and a marshal of the army. He was wealthy, powerful, and pious. But after retiring to his estates, he began to spend money recklessly on alchemy and the occult. He wanted to summon demons to restore his fortune. When the demons didn't appear, he turned to blood. He began abducting children from the surrounding villages. Over several years, he murdered hundreds of them. He confessed to cutting their throats, dismembering them, and taking pleasure in their dying moments. The contrast is shattering. The man who rode beside a saint to save France became a child-killing monster who preyed on the very people he had fought to protect. He was executed in 1440, a warning that even the greatest heroes can harbor the darkest souls. Number 18. Boston Corbett. The man who killed John Wilkes Booth was not a steely-eyed lawman. He was a hatter who had gone mad from mercury poisoning and religious zealotry. Boston Corbett was a street preacher who wore his hair long to look like Jesus. He was tormented by his own lust. One day, after being tempted by the sight of prostitutes, he decided to solve the problem permanently. He went home, took a pair of scissors, and castrated himself. He didn't go to the hospital immediately. He went to a prayer meeting, ate dinner, and then finally sought medical help. When the Civil War started, he joined the Union Army. He was in the unit that cornered Booth in the burning tobacco barn. The orders were to take Booth alive. But Corbett, watching through a crack in the wall, said God directed his hand. He shot Booth in the neck, killing him. He was arrested for disobeying orders, but was released as a patriot. He spent his later years in a mental asylum, claiming he was being poisoned until he escaped and disappeared into the woods. A ghost of history. Number 19. Diogenes. Ancient philosophy wasn't all togas and symposiums. Diogenes the Cynic was the punk rocker of Athens. He lived in a large ceramic jar, a tub, on the street. He owned nothing but a cloak and a staff. He rejected society, manners, and hygiene. When he saw a child drinking water from his hands, Diogenes threw away his wooden bowl, saying, "A child has beaten me in simplicity." He would urinate and defecate in public. His most famous encounter was with Alexander the Great. Alexander, the most powerful man in the world, came to visit the philosopher sunning himself in his tub. Alexander asked, "Is there anything I can do for you?" Diogenes didn't stand up. He just squinted and said, "Yes, stand out of my sun." Alexander was stunned by the audacity. He told his soldiers, "If I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes." Diogenes replied, "If I were not Diogenes, I would also wish to be Diogenes." He was the ultimate free man, beholden to no one. Number 20. Sarah Winchester. We end with a house that is a physical manifestation of guilt. Sarah Winchester was the widow of the man who made the Winchester repeating rifle, the gun that won the West. After her husband and child died, a medium told her that she was cursed by the spirits of everyone killed by a Winchester rifle. To appease them, she had to build a house for them. But she could never stop building, or she would die. She moved to San Jose, California, and began a construction project that lasted 38 years. Work continued 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The house is a labyrinth. It has staircases that lead to the ceiling, doors that open onto solid walls, windows in the floor. The number 13 is repeated everywhere: 13 bathrooms, 13 windows in a room, 13 steps on the stairs. She slept in a different room every night to confuse the ghosts. It is a monument to paranoia, a sprawling, chaotic structure built to outrun the sins of the past. These figures remind us that history is not just a record of politics and war. It is a record of the human condition in all its messy, terrifying, and bizarre glory. From the man who ate the world to the woman who built a maze to hide from it, they show us that the only limit to human behavior is the limit of the imagination itself.